Welcome everyone to ISKCON of Silicon Valley. Thanks for all of you who drove here today from various places. If you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, say shh. Today we're... Thank you. As every Sunday, we're meeting to discuss some aspects of Krishna's teachings in the Bhagavad-gītā. First, our organization is founded by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who you see on this seat called the Vaiśeṣika, which is a seat of honor traditionally through millennia offered to one who's a representative of Srila Vyasadeva, who is known as the literary incarnation of God, who passes on the teaching of Kṛṣṇa. You notice in the moniker ISKCON, it's called the International Site for Krishna Consciousness. This name Kṛṣṇa means that Krishna or God is a person. Kanka, are you listening? God is a person, and everything emanates from a personal source in this universe. As Krishna is known for speaking in the Bhagavad-gītā, we are very much aware that a person speaks, not an impersonal energy. And Krishna has all features very similar to human features. However, Krishna, as a person, has a completely different quality from persons in this world, in the sense that I have a body that's temporary. It's like clothing. I have it for a while, and then when it wears out, then I'll change it. But Krishna never changes his body. He's eternal. His body is made of Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Knowledge, eternality, and bliss. And Krishna's exposition on knowledge, which we call the Bhagavad-gītā, is known to be perfect because he has none of the delimiting factors that ordinary people have. So when Krishna speaks, his words illuminate. Krishna is also not a normal person because he can be present in many places at once. In fact, he's ubiquitous. He's within every atom, and he's within all of our hearts. And we all have a personal relationship with Krishna, just as one may have a personal relationship in this world with someone as a friend, or sometimes as parent to child. Sometimes we have a romantic relationship. So Krishna also has relationships with each soul. And in the Bhagavad-gītā, Krishna also describes that we're personal. That is, not only is Krishna a person, and a perfect person at that, he expands himself into unlimited living entities. We say living entities, it sounds abstract, but we're also persons. Are you a person? You sure? Yes. How do you know? Well, Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gītā that when he's describing to Arjuna on the battlefield that he's a person, Arjuna is a person, he said, and all these warriors that have gathered here are also persons, and they were persons in the past, and they'll be persons in the future. Sometimes people think that, well, maybe it's just a hologram, that I am experiencing personality now, but somehow or other I will not be a person in the future. But our practical experience doesn't line up with that thinking. In fact, there are some philosophical systems that describe how the sense of personality and interaction with others in the world right now is illusory, because actually we're more of a process than an actual person. But how does it feel to you if your grandmother passes and then when someone tries to console you by saying, well, she never existed anyway, so don't worry about it? It doesn't ring true to us. We have a sense that there was somebody relating to us. Krishna describes how that relationship we have with people in this world, it's real, but it's temporary, because, as I described before, the roles we play in this world are based on the external body. However, Krishna has an eternal relationship. We have an eternal relationship with him, and he has an eternal relationship with us. It's described in the Brahma Samhita, Sanityo Nitya Sambandha Prakritischa Paraivasa. Each one of us has an eternal personal relationship with Krishna. So Krishna as a personality has beautiful limbs. He has what we call lotus feet, and his hands are very beautiful. His eyes are extremely beautiful. We may notice that when somebody has a well-proportioned face, their face ends up on pictures and billboards because they're naturally attractive. Some people have theorized why they're naturally attractive and shown geometrically how oftentimes people whose facial features are proportionate or in a certain proportion just are naturally more attractive. So Krishna's face is perfectly proportioned, and his eyes are especially noted in many places, and they are not only penetrating, but they're very beautiful. We look for beauty in this world, and the culmination of all beauty is in the personality of Krishna. And therefore, there's someone very practical to meditate upon. When we take to the process of yoga, the objective is to satisfy the mind so that it naturally is attracted to the beauty of God. That's actually the definition of yoga, is to still the mind. And the very refined and detailed teachings of Bhakti Yoga say that the culmination of attractive features in this world is the personality of God, and that when our mind is able to see Krishna, his personal form, his face, his hands, his legs, his torso, and all the paraphernalia he carries. Krishna, as you may notice here, has a flute. Have you noticed that? Not many people carry around flutes in Silicon Valley. It used to be in San Francisco because it was an attribute of hippiedom that you'd carry a flute. I don't know where that came from. But he has many features to meditate upon. So in the Bhagavad-gītā, Arjuna asks a question about the difference between those who try to meditate on God as an impersonal force and those who absorb themselves in the beauty of the personality of Krishna. And Krishna says that it's very difficult or impossible to think of an impersonal force. Try it right now and see if you feel happy. In fact, if somebody wants to go outside right now and look at the sky and just try to commune, who would volunteer? And go out, look at the sky, and see if you can commune with the sky. And he'll come and report back how it felt. Try to feel love for the sky and become attracted to it. Not the clouds, just the blue sky. Krishna describes in the Bhagavad-gītā that although he's everything, aham sarvasya prabhavo, everything emanates from him. It's also described in the Srimad Bhagavatam that God is one, But he has variety within the one. There's variety within his oneness. There's an impersonal feature, his unlimited energy of what's called Brahman, which is somewhat like the sunshine in a sense that it's amorphous, but it's highly creative. You'll notice that winter is coming, and even when the sun is diminished, that is, its effect on the earth is diminished even by 1 minute a day, everyone notices, don't they? Especially plants and birds. The birds get a little more disappointed. Squirrels start saving more for the days to come. Although California squirrels are a little bit more chill because they know it's really short period of time. And the plants start to go to sleep. But when it comes back out again, the impersonal force of the sun, they all come alive. So in the same way, the effulgence that comes from the body, wow, I hope he didn't really fall in love with the sky. How was it? Not how good. Okay, now go and stand in front of the deities and you can just look at Kṛṣṇa, the personality, and see how you feel. He'll come back and report. So that impersonal aspect is like the sun. It's called Brahman. It's one aspect of Kṛṣṇa, but it's like the effulgence. It is the effulgence of his body. It's what illuminates everything in this world. And then there's another aspect that does have form, but that form is called Paramatma. We call super spirit, but it's not impersonal. The Paramatma, for example, as described in the Bhagavad-gītā, Kṛṣṇa describes Sarvasya chaham hridi sanivishto mataksmitir jnanamaponam cha. He says, and this is something anybody can practically realize, I'm there in my form as super spirit within the heart. And he's there as a guide. He's a guide within the heart. Although we may not have the eyes to see spirit, because our eyes are fleshy, so they're not equipped presently to see spiritual form, Kṛṣṇa nonetheless is within the heart and guiding us. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridaya Arjuna tishtati says in the Bhagavad-gītā, I'm there guiding you. However, Srimad Bhagavatam describes how even that personality of Kṛṣṇa, who's specifically here in the material world to guide us, has form. In fact, he's described in Srimad Bhagavatam as being four-armed, and he has the opulence and beauty of Narayan, or Vishnu, within the heart. And yogis can come to perceive him within the heart and meditate on him within the heart. But then the origin of the impersonal energy of God, the Brahman, and also this localized, what we call a form of Kṛṣṇa within the heart who accompanies us, not just in this body, but any body we go to after we leave this body, is known as the super spirit, Paramatma, super self. He's there to reciprocate with us, whatever our desire is. Saparya gachru karma kayam avranamas naviram shudram apapavinam. He's described as completely pure. He's never touched by the material energy. And he's there fulfilling the desire of every living entity since a time immemorial within the heart. And then you have the origin of both the super spirit and Brahman. They're part of Kṛṣṇa. They're the same as Kṛṣṇa, just same one Kṛṣṇa, but there's variety within the oneness, and that's Bhagavan Kṛṣṇa. And he describes in the Bhagavad-gītā, Mayata tamidam sarvam jagadavyaktamurtina matstani sarvabhutani nachaham teshavastitaha. That although there are all these manifestations of mine, and even he has what's called an external energy, which is the material world, made up of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. He's the source of all those energies. He's also present everywhere, but at the same time, he maintains his own personal supreme position as the origin of all of his other manifestations, just like a candle. Departure eva hidashantanama bupeta dipayate vrivate hetu samana dharma. Yes, tadrageva hicha vishnu chaya vibhati govindamadi purusham tamaham jami. If you take one original candle and you light many candles, you get multiple lights, but there's one original. So Kṛṣṇa, the personality who has form, who's the most charming of all the attractive features or all charming features anywhere within any creation, material or spiritual, he has a topmost abode in the spiritual world called Goloka. And we have the benefit in Bhakti Yoga of the description of Kṛṣṇa there within the topmost position of Goloka. For instance, in the Brahma Samhita, Chintamani Prakara Sadmasu Kalpavriksha Lakshavriteshu Surabhirapipalayantam. In his personality, it's not that he's just static, but he's active. He has his preferences as a person. For instance, people like pets, right? Well, parents don't necessarily like them, but animals are fun to be around until they're not. And then Kṛṣṇa has pets. He has cows that he loves. And he lives surrounded by devotees who have deep love for him and for whom he is the main object of their attraction. And it's not like the attraction of somebody who we may become fascinated with in this world, who then later on we become bored of. That can happen. And it's not that Kṛṣṇa loses his talents. Sometimes in this world, elite athletes who are very, very famous, they're elite from the time they're in grade school, and then in high school they excel. They're obviously 10 times, 20 times, 50 times better than everyone else. And then they make it into professional sport. And if you go to a mall and look for a special store, you can buy a shirt that has the name of that elite athlete on the back. And people will wear that shirt around and think about the elite athlete. But then one day the elite athlete will have a bad game, and then he'll blame somebody else because you think, how's it possible? I've been elite since I was in grammar school. How could I not be elite? And then have 2 bad games after that, and then everyone will start mocking that athlete and say, well, you lost a step, is what they say. And at some point, that person will have to admit, yeah, I lost a step, and then they begin their decline. But Kṛṣṇa, anejadikam manaso javiyo naina deva nuvan purvanarshad tadavato jnana teti tishta tasmina poma tarishva dadati. He can outrun anybody. He never loses a step. He's faster than all the demigods. If you get all the elite demigods and you get a race going on, Kṛṣṇa can defeat them all easily. And as far as speech goes, Kṛṣṇa, we know personalities who, when we hear them speak, there's some people, when I listen to them speak, I just want to sit there all day. And I want to listen to them in my car and wherever I go. I just can't stop listening to them because they're so intelligent and their speech is so captivating that I could listen always. And however, Kṛṣṇa is the origin of all the abilities of everyone in this world, including speaking. And as far as his speaking goes, he knows every language. And you might say, wait, hold it. You mean like 7 or 8 languages, maybe the Romance languages, which are what? No classical educated people in here. What? French, that's it? Italian, Spanish. No more than that he knows. Maybe what else? He knows maybe Arabic, right? Some people know. We've seen some polyglots on YouTube. They know supposedly 21 languages, 24. But that's nothing. Krishna can speak the languages of not just all the people of this world. He could walk around the whole planet, get one of those round the world tickets and stop everywhere. He could speak the language in every province. Even he has perfected the accents, but that's not all either. He could also speak the language of all the animals. Pregnant pause. I mean, think of that. So Krishna is always excelling in all the opulences. So the idea of bhakti yoga is that Krishna is a person. He has multifarious energies. Parasya shakti vivadaiva shuyate. So bhavika gana balakriya cha. And even his energies are amazing because he's amazing. He's all powerful. This is the meaning of God, is that he's a person. And if you forget that part, that he's a person, and just think of his energies, then you've lost the real beauty of God, and you've lost what we really want to see. What was your experience between staring at the sky and looking at the deities? Give him a microphone, let him talk about his experience. You don't have to cater to my theory, just tell us what you found.
Actually, while I was outside looking at the sky, a bird popped into like the view of where I was looking, and I noticed that my mind was automatically attracted to that, and how the mind automatically seeks personality behind everything. And even looking at the blue of the sky, I was associating it with blues I've seen elsewhere.
You're hopeless.
Whereas when I was looking at the deity, it's a lot more automatic. There's a direct form to look at. You start looking at the lotus feet and you work your way up. Then you see the lotus eyes. And we have multiple deities to look at. And there's small details. Like I noticed even in the turban, there's so many small details like pearls. There's the peacock feather. So the more you look at it, the more you find small intricate details. Whereas the sky, the more you look at it, it's just the same thing over and over and over again.
Thank you very much. I've proved my case beyond a shadow of a doubt. Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad-gītā, manmana bhavamad bhakto. Think of me. And one can easily think of Krishna because there's lots to think about. Many of the qualities I described there in the Shastra, like the nectar of devotion, he describes some of his features in the Bhagavad-gītā. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are many descriptions of Krishna. So one can hear these and remember him, and one can also come see the deity, which is called Archa. Archa means that although we can't see Krishna, his personality, his form, with our present eyes, he agrees to appear before us in stone, metal, wood, paint, jewels, and so forth, so that we can attend to his form, so we can come and see him and meditate upon him. And when we meditate on Krishna, when we become accustomed to meditating on Krishna, and when we begin to appreciate his form and his beauty, then we become purified inwardly and outwardly. Oma pavitra pavitrova sarvavastan katopiva yasmaret pundarikaksham sabhaya abhyantara shuchihi. Means that no matter what condition you're in now, if you learn how to see Krishna, the person, notice his form, notice the features of his form, come to know his personality. It's part of being a person. He has attributes that are unique to him. Then your mind can become absorbed. And when your mind becomes absorbed, then, because Krishna is a transcendental personality, when we engage our mind in him and thinking of him, then we become purified inwardly and outwardly. And that's the main objective, to remember Krishna, to think of him, to cultivate knowledge of him. And I will take a few questions. Yes?
Thank you, Guru Maharaj, for the beautiful class. Question I have is, we talked about the form of God or form of Krishna, that it is human-like. So how can a person who is not from Vedic background or who is from non-traditional background there are so many species it can be, like even we can't imagine. So how
So
is
many
it
species, what can be?
like there are millions of species, there can be
Uh-huh.
so many millions of species. How is it that god god is God has a human like form? Why not like something else? How can
Well,
it's
what form would you like? Huh? A tortoise? She's saying tortoise, but that's too easy. Well, in the science of God as a person, he also assumes many forms, in fact, all forms of all the animals. Bhavaya esha satvena lokan vailoka bhavana lilava taranurato devatirayandaradishu. He likes to play as different forms. In fact, he's the origin of everyone and everything. And the idea behind a tortoise or a fish, it originally comes from God in his playing around. It's called Leela. So every idea comes from God, every form comes from him. And its counterpart is here in the material world. The original form is there as God. So if you like to meditate on God in a certain way, which is completely possible because he presents himself, his personality, in all different species, so that everyone, according to their predisposition, can become attracted. Does that satisfy you? Okay. Yes?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
So we know of the form of Krishna, and very personal. We can see, feel, touch, and all that. But then there's this major part of the world which negates the form. And I come from kind of that sort of community of yoga. How can I tell people that the form is real, that Krishna is real? He's a person, because there's a lot of argument on this one. They're like universe and that's all there is.
Well, I can save you a lot of trouble by saying you're not required to argue with people who aren't interested in a particular aspect of God. People have various ways of relating to God or appreciating him. And the Bhagavatam, oh, look, we got the message. Move forward, we're vegetarian. And then it gives a graph that shows what it should look like and what it looks like now. You should use AI, though, and scan what it actually looks like, because that's just a prototype. It's not the real thing. So I was just in the process of saving you a lot of time. And that is that the Bhagavatam says, when we move about the world, when we learn how to relate to people who have different conceptions in the proper way, then we'll be more effective, and not only that, we'll preserve our sanity. And there are various categories of people mentioned in the Bhagavatam in the verse Ishvare Taradineshu Balisheshu Dvisatsucha Prema Maitri Kripopeksha Yakaroti Samadhima, which you'll find in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And there, this teaching of the Yogendras, there are 9 of them who travel the world and help people out by giving them the Vedic teachings. Describe how, when interacting with people, you should learn to be a judge of their character and their perspective. So first of all, he said you should always cultivate your love for Kṛṣṇa, the person. And that you can do through bhakti yoga. you really fall in love with Krishna, or at least at first fall in like, and start to develop a sense of appreciation for Krishna in any of his qualities and forms. Then you can also appreciate Krishna's devotees. Because if you've sensed also that the material world is a colossal hoax, in the sense that we're always being moved along, the interactions that we have here diminish because the whole material world is constantly morphing, and you gravitate towards those who are dedicated to remembering Krishna, then you make friends with them. Then there's another class of people, and there's plenty of them. You can look them up on Google, or maybe do an AI search and find where all the innocent, open-minded people are in the world. Apparently a lot of them are in Seattle, I heard. And they congregate at Christmas shows or something. The people who are open and innocent are easy to talk to relate to. You can talk to them about the philosophy of Bhagavad-gītā, or even at some point say, God's a person, and they won't freak out. But then there's another class of people who already have a sense of what God is or what he isn't. There might be a kind of an indoctrination, there might be a cultural momentum that they have, and then they feel rankled when you talk about God because they have a completely different idea. As a side comment, it may be more individualized according to their culture, because oftentimes people think of God as proprietary and limit the conception of God. The Upanishads are extremely universal in their description of God, that he's everywhere, he's within everything, he accommodates everyone. But some people, if you describe God in any way that sounds slightly different from what they've heard, they may become angry. And that might have to be that oftentimes in a large section of the world, if you describe God as a person, some people will feel that that's a limiting concept. That if you say God's a person, then he must be limited because we're persons and we're limited. What to speak of the fact that if he has shape and form, how could he be all-pervasive if you see him in one place? All that is just the philosophy behind that is nuanced, and it's also presented in great detail in the Srimad Bhagavatam. But to get to Bhagavatam, you'd have to get to Bhagavad-gītā. To get to Bhagavad-gītā, you'd have to get to the Sri Upanishad. To get there from having this impersonal idea of God, or a reluctance to even talk about a philosophy that would describe God as personal, because historically there's been this sense that if you do that, it's blasphemy, because there's a way that you might profane the idea of God by trying to describe him or even saying his name. In some realms, this is the case. Somebody mentioned that to Prabhupada, and he said, yeah, we have that sense also. That's why we have these 10 offenses we try to avoid. Is you don't want to just profane God by taking him for granted. We don't want to do that either. However, to the point, it's enjoined in the Srimad Bhagavatam that you shouldn't try to talk to those people about that, unless they're what is called Vaiśeṣika, which means they're a little innocent and open, and they want to hear something. And if not, if you try to describe it to them, it's an offense. Because actually, and that's listed in the 10 offenses to chanting Hare Krishnas. If someone doesn't want to hear it, then don't go into detail on it. Just give them a lollipop and try to get out of there quick. So you have to discriminate. Teaching Krishna consciousness means discriminating, and you can attract negativity if you bring it up to people who aren't ready to hear it, and they'll spew And then you'll pick up some of that negativity and so forth. It's inevitable you're going to run into it here and there, but we should try to avoid it. And that really saves a lot of time and trouble. And I know I've seen for years when we didn't have that clear instruction, that people would insist that others listen, or they take a book, they'd follow them to their car, or whatever it might be, to no, take it. And that I never saw that to be very successful. And that's because it's not a good idea. Does that help? Yeah, just wait for a pitch you can hit. Let the other ones go by. At least you'll get on base. Okay? Yes.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. Thank you for picking up such a relevant and relatable topic. So I'll start with the recent experience I had. We went to Gopal Rai's school. They had a winter holidays party, and all the kids were performing dance and jingle bells and all the things. And one of the things that caught my attention was at the end of the performance, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, they were trained to actually bow down like this. It was so sweet to see all the small toddlers and kids just bowing down at the end of their performance, which teachers must have taught to them. Now, that made me feel that they are actually trying to develop the value of humility, the principle of respecting the audience and acknowledging their presence there. And of course, humility is something that we inculcate when we bow down. Now, coming to our topic, which is the form of Krishna, right? And one of the first things that we do when we enter the temple, and it's a part of the service, that we bow down in front of the senior acharya and the deities. And coming from Eastern background, from India, yes, it is very much known. We grew up with this culture, but when we see the people in the Western world and outside India in general, not Indian people also, they don't have this, while they understand the principle of humility, but the principle of subordination or bowing down in front of somebody I don't know or somebody has a form. And why should I bow down to somebody like that? So how do I connect the two things when trying to work with somebody in the Western culture, and it's for the first time they understand the respect, but they're not ready at that point of time to fully stretch down on the floor and bow down. And while they do have respect in their heart.
I'd be careful doing dandavats at school or... No, it's a good question, and it requires practice. People actually do like to bow down, but there's not permission for it in the Western culture. I noticed when I went back to college that after being a brahmachari for 13 years, students didn't really show respect to professors at all. They would put their feet up on the chair, they would not pay attention, they didn't really speak respectfully. That's why I stood out. And other students called me teacher's pet. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is just how you're supposed to talk to a teacher, right? Isn't it? I had appreciation, and because I learned it. And it felt good, and it does feel good. People like, I've mentioned this many times, but on my excursions around Govardhan Hill, I've never, ever seen somebody doing Dandavat Parikram that was unhappy. It's not like, if you go to an amusement park, I was going to say a name of an amusement park, but I don't want to make any offenses. But if you go to an amusement park where you're supposed to have fun, everybody's in anxiety. 7-Up costs you $15, and what do you mean? It costs money to park, and then... you got to wait in line and all that, and everyone's trying to have fun, but they're not. But you see a family who's come from some village, and they've got husband, wife, 3 kids, and they're all doing Dandavat Parikram around Govardhan Hill. And I look at them, and even the kids are going, yeah. So once one learns the culture of humility and respect, it actually feels good. And it's not unknown. Even in self-help, my expert handyman who works at our house a lot, and I'm not giving you his name or number because I don't want him to get too tied up. He's been talking the last maybe 5-10 years to me about he's trying to develop humility, and And people know that when they get frustrated with the culture, they start thinking, where's there a way to rise above this? And these universal teachings are available. And then we have training. We have a culture. Prabhupada, even when newcomers from the West first saw people bowing down, there's a notable story from Gargamuni, who said to Prabhupada that, well, what if I don't feel like bowing down? And Prabhupada said, well, just do it anyway and see how you feel. And he started bowing down, and it actually is a huge relief. Because as somebody poetically once put, I don't know who it was, probably Sachinandan Swami or somebody who has this very deep realization of how things feel in Krishna consciousness, it's the only time that your heart is above your head. And there's sort of, I did Dandavat Parikram once. It's just around Radhakund Shamakund. But I just remember after the first 3 Dandavats on the ground and thinking, like, what are you bowing down on right now? And then I just forgot that concept. And I thought, I never felt so relieved and satisfied because I can't get any lower right now. And nobody can really say anything to me because, look, I'm on the ground. My head's on the ground, and that's it. That's where I live. And so it's natural. It's not just a cultural thing, but it takes training, and it has to do with an attitude of cynicism that develops sometimes in various cultures. For instance, there's been historically a sense of worshiping kings and queens, but a lot of them really blew it. In fact, that's one of the ways that Kali Yuga comes into full bore, is because the leaders become degraded. And although it's natural, people want to love a leader. In fact, even now when things are so topsy-turvy, there's this very inherent sense of passion. It's like, no, my leader's great. He's like, are you sure about that? But there was a time when leaders were great. They were Raja Rishis. Imagine that. And how natural it is to offer respects to a highly posted person who's a representative of God. Even in natural culture, in Varnashram, there's a king. For Varnashram, you have to have a king, actually. And so that's natural in the heart. Over time, people became cynical. It's like, king, queen, forget it. That's what America is. It's the land of the cynics. Me and my people broke away from the crown and said, forget you guys, we ain't worshiping no king and queen. Forget you guys. And we just said, get some muskets and we'll fight these guys, and then we'll start our own thing, come up with our own document. And it's all of us. We'll all just be equal, and we'll all just rule each other, ourselves. And we'll make all these stopgap measures, and it'll never fall apart, because we the people and so forth. It may be a better system, who knows, for Kali Yuga, but the fact is that people have become cynical. And that's one of the ways that we stall in this idea that there is a God. People become cynical and they think there is no supreme. In fact, I saw a bumper sticker yesterday or today. It had all the symbols. You know how they have those that say coexist? It wasn't that. It said fiction. And it had all the symbols of every religious group on it. And that's a cynical way of approaching everything. And so that's the prevalent mood in the world, and being able to come to a point where you want to bow down to someone and it's meaningful requires some practice and education. And then it's something Krishna said is a mainstay of a spiritual practice. That's not sectarian. Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. He says, offer obeisances. And it really feels good when you know what you're doing. It can be learned. Yes? We need a microphone for our friend in the back.
Hare Krishna. So my question is regarding if there's a way to reconcile the form and formless. A lot of my understanding, which could be wrong, is that when the Vedas say, things like Tattvamasi or Aham Brahmasmi, which is like I am Brahma, that is a way to understand our true essence, which is formless. But when we take in the role of a human in a form, then it is important to have another human in a form so that we can worship and have devotion to them. As it was stated clearly earlier as well, it's hard to worship something that's formless, but we take in those roles of forms so that we can have that relationship. Otherwise, our true essence is actually formless. Is there a way to reconcile that, or is that a wrong way
Could
to
you
understand?
make a one-sentence question with a question mark at the end, no semicolons?
Sure. Is there a way to reconcile where you have both form and formless, and where either one is a relationship or not?
Yeah. There's a way in which everything has a personal form and an impersonal aspect as well. For instance, an industrialist starts a company and gets a logo. That person owns the company. That person is the personality of the company. The origin, the company comes from that person. But then if you go visit the factories that person has set up through his or her intelligence and management and getting loans and doing everything else, then you'll notice that it's still considered to be, for instance, if it's Ford, if you go to a Ford factory, that's Ford. But Ford's not there in every office, and Ford's not there in every factory, although that's the energy of Ford. And there's this sense of a orange plant that Prabhupada gives. It has its personal, or it has its form, and then it also has many energies that emanate from it. Ascorbic acid, for instance, it produces naturally. And so we find that energies tend to emanate with energies which are amorphous, or we might call impersonal to some degree, because they don't necessarily have personality. They emanate from a person. And therefore it's observable, it's natural everywhere. And in the Bhagavad-gītā, Kṛṣṇa says, of course, I'm the origin of all these other aspects. Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritasya vaisesika shashvatasya chadharmasya sukasya ikandikasya. He says definitively in the Bhagavad-gītā, when asked point blank by Arjuna, which is better, the personal or impersonal Krishna? That's an easy one. The personal. The everything is very troublesome to meditate in the impersonal, and then he gives a statement later on where he says, definitively, I'm the source of the impersonal. And of course, logically, as I described, there's a way in which energies come from a personality, and the energies can be perceived as impersonal. Last question? Yes, Bali, Mardan Prabhu. 3 seconds or less. He's reduced the number of seconds to get the microphone, so we can get more out of 2025, perhaps.
So I think in continuation of my reflection, as you know, there is likely different gradations of the form, because when I was actually last week, how do you know that we are coming from God? I said, what is your DNA? Then we started about what is your blood group? Okay, O positive, B positive. What is God's blood group? So it goes on like the DNA, the blood group. So mostly it lies within the body concept. And I was telling, look, there is 8 gradations of the body, living entities, which is even given in different Upanishads. And even Brahma and demigods is a different body. They don't have a blood even. If you talk about Indra, it doesn't have a body like us that he needs to go and medical operations. But he is still not spiritual and not God. And then Brahma, if you talk about, there is much more. So in connections with that, we can find out that God has to have a DNA, and God has to have a blood group. And because we are thinking from our perspective that I have all the things, and the person who has a form should have all the things. Mm-hmm. And one of the purport Prabhupada also mentions that when you consider the same one, and we believe that in sun god there is nobody lives there because we think it's 6,000 degree temperature, our body cannot sustain, but there are different types of body which sustain there also. So we definitely need to think first of all the locally and then imagine the form of God, how it is,
Yeah, thanks,
it is
Bali.
not formless.
It's a very helpful progression of thought. And it also has a lot to do with understanding categories, which is called tattva. Tattva, tat means that. Means something substantial, a category you can point to and say, this is defined by these characteristics, and that's defined by different characteristics. That's what tattva means. And in the Bhagavad-gītā, Krishna gives a very simple formula. Nasato vidite bhavo, na bhavo vidite sata, ubayor api drishnon tas tvanios tattva darshibi. A person who knows tattvas, which is one of the important, which is a foundational aspect of spiritual life, is to know your energies, knows the difference between material and spiritual. And as an example, following your lead of what how you were describing to somebody, in the Sri Upanishad, it's described that God is without veins. And it's a common fallacy that people think backwards, and they think material means substantial and spiritual means something wispy and insubstantial. But it's opposite. That's the philosophy of Bhagavad-gītā. It's the opposite. Spirit is substantial. It always exists, and the energy upon which matter is able to manifest to some degree. And when the spirit's gone, for instance, when you leave your body, then the body just falls apart because spirit's not there. Because it is the tattva that maintains the matter, that manifests matter, that upon which matter, spirit is that upon which matter is able to coagulate for some time. Again, the evidence is you leave your body falls apart. That's the sequence. You come into a lump of matter is able to manifest. That's tattva. And if you don't understand that, then it's hard to extrapolate and come to a point of understanding, well, God's like me, right? But he's just a little better. It's the frog in the well philosophy, which, by the way, if anybody doesn't know the frog in the well, there's a frog, and he's a Professor Frog. He has a PhD. And one of the younger frogs leaves the area of the well where Dr. Frog and many other esteemed frogs live, and goes on a journey in the back of a bullock cart and sees the ocean, and then comes back and says, I'll never be the same. I saw the biggest body of water that anyone could ever conceive of. And Dr. Frog said, come on, describe it. How big is it? Is it twice as big as the well? He said, no, it's way bigger than that. Impossible. You're a heretic. It couldn't possibly be. Okay, 3 times. No, much bigger. Dr. Frog apparently expired in trying to speculate to understand the length and breadth of the ocean that the younger frog had seen. So we have to accept the definitions of tattva from Bhagavad-gītā axiomatically in order to be able to then logically understand the idea of God having a form, because form is substantial, matter isn't. So that brings us to, yes? We missed somebody? That's really sad. Could somebody who raised their hand, please, feel free. We'll give you a microphone. Bali Mardana has reduced the time, so now it's 3 seconds or less. Otherwise, you get a free plate of prasadam later. No, we'll move you to the front of the line if we miss. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much for considering my question. I just had a follow-up from one of the previous questions. I just wanted to ask, what is the best way to approach someone who does have thoughts about how God could be an energy, but is still on the path of discovering, still reading, things like that. And what I could gauge from that person was he would benefit from association, but obviously I wouldn't want to commit an offense if his stronger thoughts were leaning towards God as an energy.
Yeah. That's a really good question, because it then brings us to, well, what are we all doing going out and meeting people all the time and introducing them to literatures like Srimad Bhagavatam? No, take it. Well, we've had some experiences recently that were telling and may help to answer your question. Around the time when the pandemic first started, we began a program called Bhakti Community. It invites people who are, you call first-timers, who come and they're not so acquainted with Krishna consciousness, but they're interested in spirituality. And they may say more things, something like, oh, I prayed to the universe and I got a car, or whatever. And we studied a lot of different groups, especially groups in Krishna consciousness. We looked at other Christian groups too, who specialize in inviting new people to come into a discipline, and how will they learn it? How will they assimilate it, going from not knowing it to coming to embrace it? That's what we studied a lot. And so we came up with a formula to invite people, and just practically the format is that people would join a Zoom call, because at that time when we started, it was all offline. We started at the very beginning of the pandemic, and we would show a 10-minute video, and we had 32 of them, 32 10-minute videos that started from a very simple explanation of Krishna consciousness that didn't trigger anybody. We were careful not to come right out and say, by the way, God's a person, he plays a flute. We started with using careful language, translating a lot of the terminology that triggers people. If you say God, we'd say the Supreme. And when we talked about living energies, we try not to use jargon. We talk about consciousness and so forth. Innocuous terms are terms that are more universally accepted, sound more scientific. It is science. And as we progressed and we began running out of runway for expressing it in a very neutral way, we realized that in such a program, after all, it is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, we have to come to a point where we say, oh, and by the way, God is a person. And when do you actually break the news to somebody is partly your question, right? So we had this experience around week 31 when we broke it to everybody on the program. On a Zoom call, we show the video. The video was about deity worship. And frankly, we were all a little nervous. And I think that we weren't watching the video, we were watching everyone's faces to see what. And part of that video was the Maha-Abhishek in Mayapur of the Panchatattva. You've got people standing on ladders, dumping, like 20 gallons of yogurt. And then after we'd show a video, it was our protocol to break up into small groups and then discuss what'd you see, what'd you hear, what'd you think. At least in my group, and then when we came back together later and discussed what happened, it was very similar. Rather than have an allergic reaction, most people in my group said, oh, why didn't anybody tell us this before? I was shocked and relieved at the same time that there was a sense of, wow, can you do that? Really talk about, in the culture we all come from, it's taboo to talk about a form of God. Like, how do you know? And why isn't it some other form? And isn't it blasphemy? It could be many of those misgivings and hesitations to talk about a personality of Godhead. But because there was a progression and a foundation that we built over many, many weeks, there was also a sense of trust in those who were presenting, and much of it was epistemology. How do you know you know? And how do you understand anything? How do you even know you're alive? How do you know you're a person and not a brain in a petri dish somewhere that's being manipulated. You know, when you're able to systematically come to that point, as does the Bhagavad-gītā and the Srimad Bhagavatam together and the teachings of the great acharyas, there is a time at which you can make that leap. And we noticed that people were able to do that. And so I guess the answer to the question is systematically, carefully, sensitively. And then there's also the issue of it has to really do a lot with trust, to be in a trusting environment. So much of it has, whatever we open ourselves to, has to do with whether we appreciate the qualities of the people we're dealing with. And we start to think, well, if it's coming from a person like this, then maybe I should listen. And that's something Kṛṣṇa mentions in the Bhagavad-gītā, where he says some people are just open-minded and they're open to hearing from other people, but if they hear from the right person, then they'll become Krishna conscious. Did that help? Oh, good. Thank you. Now, coming to the last subject, not the very last, but this is a very important segue into the chanting of Hare Krishna. And that is it's not unique in history. Even it's been expressed in Christian theology, albeit not without some contention, that God and his name are the same. You can look in history, and there was a group of Christians monks, who began to teach that God and his name are the same, and that praying to God and saying God's name was a way of having direct communion. And there was another part of the church that said it was heresy. And the ones that started the idea got banished and sent to an island, and so forth. So I'm not saying it's not absolutely unique, but it's prominent. And the prominent aspect of Krishna consciousness, or our movement, is that we teach what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught, and which is prevalent in the Vedic teachings. It is God and his name are the same. Same potency, it's the same person. There's no difference whatsoever. So you can have direct communion with God by saying his names. And therefore, or incidentally, or in the same vein, Narada Muni in his teachings to Srila Vyasadeva has said this very directly. Iti murtyabhidanena mantra murtim amurtikam, which means that ordinarily it's very difficult to see the form of God, but then he says something profound, and he says, you can see the form of God in his name. And he said it's not partial, it's complete and it's direct. Therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, in the present age, there's a preferred method for worshiping the personality of God, and that's through his name. Therefore, we chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And we advocate it. And we also have these ideas which are backed up by Srimad Bhagavatam, that if other people hear it, they can sense something spiritual in it. They can even be inextricably drawn to it, and many times are, based on their qualification. And what to speak of somebody who studies the science and then practices it regularly and with very sincere intent. Such a person, said Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, can step by step develop the highest spiritual acumen and vision in his or her life. So that's what our Krishna conscious movement is based on, the personality of God. First and foremost and most important, God is a person. His name is Krishna. He has unlimited names. God has no name, but he has unlimited names. And the name Krishna we prefer because he describes him as all attractive. Hare refers to his female counterpart, Srimati Radharani, and both are here in the deity form. It's not a representation. They're actually personally present, as they are in the name Hare Krishna. And then you have Rama, of course, which means that God's the source of all spiritual strength and the highest pleasure. So we can try it. Okay? Let's do. Before we pack up and get ready for the Hare Krishna dance party. I have a service for somebody who has an expertise in a certain, in a certain area, if you wish. I got this from United Airlines, our preferred carrier. They gave us this little thing here. And on the back of it, it has, these are perforated. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each perforated. And on the back of each one, it says, share your feedback with us. After completing the card, please provide it to the United employee. That says, your hard work has not gone unnoticed. Thank you for being, and then it has these boxes you can check. Kind-hearted, beyond helpful, extra efficient, truly dependable. And then it has some open area. It says, share your details on your experience. And then below it has the employee name, flight number, etc. And I thought it would be nice to make some cards like this, perforated. And then we could have them in our community for different reasons. Like, say you wanted to stop by the kitchen on the way out, tear one off, put your appreciation and hand it, or somebody that you see doing some service that you really appreciated, collect them, trade them with your friends. What do you think? You sure? Okay. Well, what I'm looking for is somebody who knows how to do this kind of stuff. It means you got to know some software where you lay this out like this, and then I'm sure if you take it down to one of the premier printer places, they maybe have a template or something they could show you how to do it. Then, of course, you'd want a design person to help out too, that could help design it and come up with, expand the ideas for it. Okay, Prabhu, you're raising your hand. Do you have an idea you want to do this? Would you like to head it up? Okay, if anybody else wants to join you, they can also volunteer. Here, pass this back to him. And if anybody else would like to consult, you can just give free advice if you want. Or you could, if you have a talent and you want to help him out. Otherwise, he'll just use all his resources, or he'll come after you or something. Yes? Oh, yeah. You're good. So you've got Part on your team. Anybody else want to just consult, start a little brainstorming? Okay, thank you. Om Shanti. That there's a way in which you can innovate, and just the thing is, you want to be able to appreciate people and make it demonstrative and write things down. Just brainstorm it and see if we can turn it into a trend here where we try to appreciate everybody as much as possible. It's really hard when we do it all at once individually. We've tried that before, and we drove home exhausted and thought, I think we left a lot of people out. But if we do it on an individual case-by-case basis, I think it could spread this Dadati Pratigurnati mood around here. What do you think? All right. Okay, then. The next part of our program is going to start in 5 minutes, so we're going to take time to put away the asanas. Go in that box over there. We're going to roll up this carpet. We're going to meet back on the dance floor in front of the deities. Usually the ladies are on this side, the gentlemen on that side. There's a row down the middle. Try not to stand in front of the harmoniist, and to keep an open line so Prabhupada can see. And then we'll dance the night away. What do you think? Okay, thank you everyone for coming. We'll see you back here in 4 minutes and 32 seconds. On your mark, get set, go. Hare Krishna.